Hello and welcome to Lunch Therapy. Today is a unique day because we have a scientist, a PhD on the show in Max Levy. So excited. We've had a scientist on the show before, Lori Moan. I don't know if anybody else remembers other scientists who have been on the show, but this is kind of a first because we're going to talk about the future. I'm on here always talking about the future, but I don't know what I'm talking about. But Max Levy does. He writes for Wired magazine. He writes for all kinds of different publications and online, and I don't know. Do they have magazines anymore? Yeah, I think they do. Smithsonian, Quanta magazine, The Verge, Vox, Science magazine. Just goes on and on and on. Salon. So I decided, hey, let's get Max on the show, and he graciously accepted, and we're going to talk science and what's happening in the world, positively, and also what we, might want to be careful with, because science is a very powerful thing. First thing we're going to do is check in with the chat room. Science. Jose Salas is here. Greg Wardle is here. Thank God. So no roads where we are going. No roads. Well, we're going to be making roads, I guess, but we have to, sometimes our media helps us shape our idea of the future, and maybe we can have a conversation about what we want that future to look like. I'd like it to look like this, perhaps. Hoy Ganell. Okay, futurism. Dr. Michio Kaku and futurism. See, I don't know about that, but I will. John Peckinpah, great to see you. Okay, we've got to breathe, and then we're going to get into this thing. In through the nose, out through the toes. Hold it. Top of the show, we always breathe. Let it go. I also want to thank Shelby Benefield for introducing me to Max. She is a great actor and a really good friend of mine, so thank you for doing that. In through the nose, out through the toes. Hold it. As you'll see, Max is a delightful gentleman. Let it go. Very much along the lines of the kind of people we love to have on the show. One more. In through the nose, out through the toes. Hold it. Let it go. Greg says, dude, Back to the Future Doc Brown quote. Have you ever watched a movie? I haven't seen many movies. Greg Wordla. Oh, that's what it is. Okay, thanks for clarifying that, Greg Wordla. Smart guy. In through the nose, out through the toes. One more. Hold it. Let it go. There's Shelby. Hoy, Shelby. Great to have you here. All right, let's get into this thing. I'm going to have Max on. We're going to have little segments. I'm going to come back to kind of a landing point. We're going to maybe discuss a little bit and then move on. Here we go. It's Interview Friday. Science. All right, Max Levy. We're really excited because on the show, Lunch Therapy, we talk about science issues and maybe some of the advancements in science. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. I hope I read a lot about very different things, and so in doing so, I end up being a master of none.
How did you get involved in science in the first place? Were you always like a scientist kid? Were you making volcanoes like on Brady Bunch, where they made that volcano and it exploded? Was that you?
No, actually, actually not. I think I was always like fine at science and math, or I was probably pretty good, but it was
Yeah.
never something that I was like super passionate about. Although I was like interested in it, but I always had like other creative interests, I would say. But in middle school, I started getting a bit more serious about it. In high school, I started doing some science programs. Before I graduated, I had the chance to go to the University of Florida for this like 6 week science program where they had me like in the lab doing research. So before that, I had not really had much any concerted experience to do lab research. But when I was there, I was doing some stuff the world of like nanotechnology, and this was like something that was like totally foreign to me at the time, but I was just like assigned this project and I was working with this professor. It was just, looking back on it, it was just like this amazing, really really cool, super valuable experience. And I just got exposed to the world of like academic research and like what science actually looks like, beyond like a headline or like a press release or something like that, like really what it looks like, which is a lot of waiting and failing and
I can only
pouring
imagine.
liquids.
Yeah.
It's a lot of pouring liquids from one container into another, basically. So that's sort of like how I grew to sort of get a desire to use sort of my skills of science and math to solve problems and to really just learn about the world around. So
Were
I ended
you
up going to,
working on some
yeah.
kind of like, uh, you know how antibiotics become sort of ineffective over time? Is that something that
Mm.
you were working on solving
That's something that I started working on when I was in grad school. So in
in grad
undergrad,
school?
what I researched on was mostly making these sort of like these really really thin coatings that are clear but are not reflective. And basically, what the idea is, like you put these on like solar panels, and you don't lose light to glare. You can kind of capture more. And the idea of that is basically you have like these like tiny little particles inside these coating, and that sort of helps things along. And what's funny is when I went to grad school, I was doing something in the world of antibiotics, but really what's really cool about nanotechnology is that fundamentally a lot of the science is really the same between what I was doing in undergrad and in grad school. And what I mean by that is that in both cases, uh, whether you're designing a coating that's going to be like anti-reflective and super clear and conductive, or whether you're kind of making these particles that are going to kill bacteria and use light to do that, really at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're designing chemistry. You're designing these tiny little, basically like tiny invisible little rocks, and you're creating these things using what you know about chemistry. And so fundamentally it's all the same thing, but the applications are so diverse.
I have no idea what happened there, but we've got much more to get into here. We're going to talk about nanotechnology. That's something that I'm really interested in, and I think maybe that's kind of something that's on the forefront here. So let's see what Max has to say about nanotechnology. Can you explain to us what nanotechnology is?
Yeah. So nanotechnology is basically, so nano meaning really, really small.
Yeah.
A nanometer, for reference, is basically like uh, thousands of times smaller than like the width of a human hair. And so
Oh.
what you're doing in nanotechnology is you're creating these things, whatever they may be,
Mhm.
that are at the scale of thousands of times smaller than what you can even see. And what's really interesting about nanotechnology, why it's such a buzzword, is that when you get down to that realm, a whole world of possibilities opens up over what you're actually able to do. You're able to
Yeah.
control process in such a precise way that you can get materials to do whatever you want them to do. And really, that's been super enabling for computing. I mean, all of our phones or our laptops all have like processors that involve some sort of nanotechnology, either to get a material to behave exactly in the precise way so that it can uh, open Snapchat much faster than something from a couple of years ago. All the really, really important stuff.
The super important stuff. I think I first became aware of nanotechnology was when I read the book "The Singularity is Near" about nanobots they were talking about, and
Mm,
how we're going to have like these little robots in our body that are
mhm.
so smaller than the human hair that are going to fix things and do all kinds of stuff that we have no idea what they're going to do. Can you tell us, is that a reality? Is that something that we're having? Is that something we're going to be having? How important are nanobots?
Yeah, so definitely not yet. I think that's an example that comes up a lot. Um, i- in the iteration that you're kind of mentioning, I don't think
Mhm.
that we're anywhere close to that yet.
Yeah.
But um, but I do think that the general idea of letting something letting some tiny things loose into the world or the body, and having them fix things, it's not impossible. It's certainly not
Yeah.
impossible. I think that some people work on making little biological things that would do the same thing, and
So those
so
nanobots are the ones that seem to be existing now. Like they did something
okay,
with frog cells, I think, recently, right? And
yeah.
they're actually organic. They're not actually like robots like we would think of robots being mechanical. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So these are xenobots, and they're not exactly nanobots. They're basically, if you could imagine, uh, a frog, basically. So imagine like a tadpole, for
Hmm.
instance. The tadpole is made up of all these cells, right? And on the surface, you just have these cells that are supposed to be like a skin, for instance, and that's their job. They're just skin cells on a tadpole. What the xenobots, and what that research looks at doing is taking those cells and having them kind of group together in their own way that's not on a tadpole, and seeing whether they can sort of do things on their own and figure out how to exist basically outside of the tadpole. So it's not exactly nanotechnology, but it does kind of get into this weird blurry space that you're talking about, where it's like, is this a machine? Is this a living thing? These are designed by AI. So basically, they're formed into certain shapes based off of what a computer program determined is like, this is a shape that will be able to solve certain tasks that 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 could actually function and kind of be stable for a longer period of time. Um, and it turns out that it works. But yeah, you end up with this weird thing that's like a living machine, as people
Do
call
you
them. So
think
it's not
that
exactly
that's
yeah.
the major space that we're going? I don't like to use the word space, but anyway, do you think that's the major area of technological revolution at this time is biotechnology? Do you think that's like just we're like entering into the age of biotechnology?
Yeah, yeah. I think that is definitely fair. And there's so many different ways in which we can interpret what that actually means. So many different ways in which we can imagine like how biotechnology will look and what it'll allow us to do.
Yeah.
But without question, I agree with that. I think that we've if you look back over history, I mean, centuries ago, so much focus was really on, you know, physics and math and understanding sort of the principles of like what's the nature of the world around us. Also just like looking at the nature around us, looking at animals and all that. But
Yeah.
the more and more we learn about what those kind of like the basic foundation of everything is, the more
Yeah.
we can kind of figure out, okay, like how does something build on that? How do we then get chemistry from physics? How does biology come out of chemistry?
Mm.
And the more we learn about that stuff, the more we can start to control it. And so that's really where we are now, is using all that we know about physics, about chemistry, about biology, about math, and how we can fuse all this together to control biology and the world around us. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting time in that regard.
Okay, so one of the things that concerns me about science and the future, and I think it concerns all of us, is are robots going to kill us? What are the ethics of the science that's going on, and are they moving it toward a world where we're going to thrive or a world where we're going to be obsolete? So I asked Max about this. This is about ethics in technology. Yeah, it like opens up so many different possibilities, and then it seems like computers interfacing with biology seems to increase the discoveries so exponentially that
Hmm.
it becomes a little bit frightening sometimes. So, how do you think we as a culture can guide our technology into a productive place rather than a destructive place?
So I've been working on some stories lately where I speak with AI researchers, and one concern that comes a lot out of AI research is sort of um, ethical. It's technical, but it's ethical. And what I mean by that is that when we're designing algorithms, when we're deciding which problems to solve and how to solve them, i- it's easy to just figure out how technically to figure out sort of like the ones and zeros of how to like solve this problem
Yeah,
and train an algorithm to figure out how to do stuff on their own. But what historically there's been less focus on is thinking about, okay, what can go wrong, what's
yeah,
not being included in this. So the most clear cut example of this when it comes to AI, that we've seen in recent years is like facial recognition, for
right.
instance.
That's what I was thinking
It,
about too. Yeah.
yeah, if so much of the training data uh, is based on white faces, for instance,
Mm,
um, you you get less confidence and less effectiveness when you start throwing this out into the world where there's not just white faces, right?
yeah, yeah,
And so that's created so many different problems, and so that's just really one like super stark illustrative example of where there can be real world implications when you put all of your confidence in a algorithm
yeah.
and sort of a black box. You put all your confidence, say, okay, tell me what the answer is, tell me what to do. Um, but at the end of the day, when you might have an imperfect process of getting to that algorithm, you're not exactly sure how certain this algorithm is in the
Yeah.
answer it's giving you. It's just
And
doing
the
what you
the
told it to do.
conclusion it draws, because we as humans sometimes will look at data and draw a conclusion. It seems to happen more and more often that you see this in media. You see it all over the place where people look at data and they draw a conclusion that is not really necessarily the only conclusion. Do you
Hmm.
think there's an arrogance in silent science right now, or a maybe a pressure to make something profitable that is maybe driving us into some areas that might be dangerous?
Yeah, so I think that the incentive structure, throughout science and honestly just uh, throughout society, the incentive structures are backwards. That there's no question about that. It's not something that a lot of people have solutions for, and in reality, if you speak to scientists, they recognize that, and individually, they are not, by and large, are not intending to mislead, not intending to choose personal gain over kind of the advancement of science in general. It's just that's sort of a product of how papers get published. What research is more grabs headlines more, what advances work in that regard, and what people want to fund and what people want to see. So I mean, if what's determining um, if what's determining the answers that we're trying to get, the questions that we're trying to answer, the problems that we're trying to solve, if what is driving that is um, venture capital, then we're gonna get uh, we're gonna
We're
get
going to be in
products
trouble.
and
Yeah.
systems that reflect that, right?
Yeah.
So that's just sort of a nature of of,
Is there a
of
morality code for scientists? You know how doctors they have the creed that says "do no harm" or something like that.
mm,
Is there something for scientists or is there something that scientists go to get? I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's the Bible for some people, but do they go someplace to get some kind of perspective on the morality
Mm.
decisions that they have to make, or is
Yeah,
that a concept at all?
I think it depends on, so there's two things that come to mind. I think one, the process of science. I mean, if you're doing it right and doing it ethically, it's it's pretty clear cut uh, what is what is an action that is like sort of with integrity, what makes sense, what is scientific and what's not. I mean,
Mhm.
having uh, uh, not fudging numbers in when you're analyzing your data. I mean, really
Yeah,
testing things, repeating your tests and making sure it's right, and you're just following the scientific method. That's really the first and foremost the most important thing. When you start getting into stuff like animal research, human research, then there
yeah,
are systems in place that are very strict and very by the book on what you can do, what processes you have to abide by that are non-negotiable, um, to make sure that no one is cutting corners and doing something wrong. So I do have some faith that things are above board there. Uh, but there's always going to be some people who try to cut corners a little bit. And
disruptors.
what?
This whole
Yeah,
disruptor idea, it's like seems like that's like a modern day sort of rebel, but it also is a modern day sort of um, a Dr. Evil sometimes.
mhm.
The disruptor, you know
Yeah,
what I mean? To go in and just disrupt
yeah.
some area where people that maybe have their livelihood is important there, such as cab
Mhm,
drivers, with Uber and things like that.
mhm,
Um, you'd think that there would be some kind of moral obligation uh, on the part of the people who are the disruptors to find a
mhm.
way to make it beneficial for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. I think some of that just gets lost in a transition. People just get really excited about a new
Yeah.
thing, and they don't think about necessarily what the
The
fallout is going to be.
ramifications.
And so,
Yeah.
and so, and so, some of that, I guess, is policy. Some of that is what we're prioritizing. I mean, business in America, at least, is running a business. The top priority is growing, right? It's
Yeah.
growing, generating profit, generating money for shareholders. That's the
Yeah.
top priority. So if there's not a social priority in doing so, then you're not going to end up with those benefits.
But for a long time, I've been wondering when they're going to get around to putting implants in our brain. And I've been wondering this for a long time since I think I saw it on In Search of, the television show In Search of, where they were talking about that. And for a while there, it seemed like an impossibility. But now it seems like we're getting there if we haven't gotten there already. So I wanted to ask Max about that. Here's what he said. What is something you're excited about in science right now, as far as for mankind or for humankind?
One thing that has been really accelerating in recent years, and you mentioned it a little bit of it, is uh, this idea of kind of fusing computers and biology. And so there's two different ways, really quickly, that I think that are really exciting. That it's hard for me to pick. One of them is like using computers to automate like drug discovery. So like having a computer run a bunch of simulations to find what is a possible drug that could kill a certain bacteria based off of just what we know about biology and chemistry, that sort of thing. That's super exciting to me because it's a way of like using computers to replace a bunch of very tedious
Tedious,
work
yeah,
that is rooted in something very fundamental and that works. So that's one thing. Another thing is like much more literally fusing kind of computers and biology, which is like brain computer interfaces for one. Um,
yeah,
there there's there's so many different ways in which you can have an accident and have your ability to move, to speak, to communicate, to live your life disrupted. There's so many different ways in which that can happen. Um, there's so many different individual problems to solve there. And what's really exciting to me is not just that, oh, people will have these brain computer interfaces where maybe someone will get an implant and they can move a prosthetic arm, for instance. It's that it's the sheer diversity in the number of solutions uh, uh, available for something like that. So there's a lot of different research focused on the individual different problems just within that realm.
Recently we had a guest on the show, Mike Knox, who's a comedian and also an author,
Mhm.
and his daughter was having seizures, and they've found this brain or this interface that interfaces with the vagus nerve and can
Mm.
detect when seizures are going to happen and kind of override that system so that it doesn't happen or it happens less frequently. Is this the kind of thing that you're talking about?
So I haven't looked at too much vagus nerve stuff, but that
Yeah.
sounds really exciting. I know that there's
Well,
a
it
lot of
certainly helped
research
his
about
daughter
this.
quite a bit, yeah.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
that's
changed her
yeah. I mean,
quality
and
of
that's
life
amazing,
completely.
and then there really are a lot of uh, different sort of technologies that are hoping to like stimulate nerves, stimulate the spinal cord, stimulate different nerves in your arms to allow you to once you're if you're paralyzed to move your own actual arm just by thinking
Yeah,
because there's these little electrical pulses that are firing into your wrist and into your elbow. Um, and so I think what you're saying is a perfect example of what I find really exciting is that as this world has grown,
yeah,
it's not we're not just getting into discussing one sort of application, one sort of idea for like one lab that's doing this. We're talking about so many different labs around the world, so many different research institutions that are that are looking at the millions and millions of people who are affected with certain disabilities and paralysis, different forms of paralysis, and saying, okay, they need a variety of different solutions. How can we begin to address each and every single one? So
yeah.
yeah, I think that's really
Yeah,
fascinating.
I'm really interested in this idea of a brain interface that I feel like right now we have our iPhones and they are connected to our brain via our fingers and our eyes,
Mm,
essentially. We have an interface already with a computer. But I think
mm,
probably eventually we're probably going to bring that more inside of our body in some way. This used to sound like just craziness, but it seems like that might be happening. And it seems like the entry point for that is medical because
mm,
people have needs. They need to be able to see or walk or
yep.
hear or smell or whatever it is. And these things seem like they're good solutions for that. What do
Mhm.
you think the solutions are beyond the medical? Do you think we'll be able to learn things faster? Do you think we'll be able to process decisions faster? Do you think this is something that's on the horizon?
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I obviously I have no idea.
Yeah,
That's I think depending on who you ask, that's absolutely on the table.
yeah,
Um, when it comes to like what these would actually look like, it might be hard to convince people to get brain surgery
yeah. It's kind of a big
to
one, isn't
improve their
it?
life. They don't have a problem, but that it also might not be totally necessary.
Yeah.
I saw just before getting on, I saw that Snap, like, the parent company for Snapchat and all,
Uh-huh.
they just bought some brain machine interface company, not one that relies on an implant, but one that has like a sort of headband.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
I've
the
seen
idea,
that. They bought
yes,
that.
it's they just bought that, and the idea,
People
I
can,
believe,
it's a headband and they can control things with it.
yeah, yeah. I forget if they can control things or if it just collects some. I don't know specifically what it
Yeah.
does,
Yeah.
but what I know that they're wanting to do is sort of kind of fuse these technologies, kind of meld them together with like Snapchat like spectacles. If you've ever
Yeah.
seen those,
Yeah.
and the idea is like getting some sort of like AR kind of combination with whatever signals they can pick up from your brain. So maybe like automatically opening a text message or
Oh
automatically
my
sending a
God.
picture just because you're thinking about like, oh yeah, I want to take a picture. Bam, I got it.
Wait, I didn't
So
mean to do that. I was just thinking
yeah.
about it. There's I mean, one of the things that I found really interesting was, they put electrodes on our heads and they can be able to read our brain waves. And
Mhm.
now they've done, I've seen what Elon Musk is doing with his neural nets and how they have that video of the monkey with he has
Mm.
like a joystick and he's playing a game and then eventually, and they have him hooked up to get his brain waves recorded. And
Yeah.
so then after a while they can detach the controller so it's just the thoughts that are moving
Yeah.
what's happening on the screen, which is quite incredible. But someone somewhere along the line when I was researching this said something very interesting, and they said so that means that if they can record brainwaves and figure out what you're intending to do, all they need to do is find a better way to read the brainwaves,
Mm.
like maybe not by attaching things to your head, but actually being somewhere in the vicinity, maybe the glasses. I don't know. Maybe that's what that technology is addressing. And then, what does that mean? Like, now then you get into a whole conspiracy kind of thing. Like, what will they be able to read your brainwaves from a satellite? What will they be able to do? It
Yeah,
just goes on and on, doesn't it?
I think there's probably a lot of limits there, that are good. I think that
I hope so.
if there was a clear path from Neuralink to
Yeah.
getting to satellites that can read your mind, that would be probably pretty troublesome. So
Yeah.
fortunately, I think that some of the limits there are that. So Neuralink, for instance, would be like with that monkey playing, what was it, Pong, I think it
Yeah.
was.
Pong. Right.
Uh, the that involves like an actual implant inside the skull,
Yeah.
an actual implant. Whether it's possible to do that with just like a head cap or something, or just
Mhm.
electrodes attached to the skull, I would think that something like that is possible. But again, that's like direct contact with your
Your head.
head,
Yeah.
and the signals that you can pick up on when it gets to that level, obviously drastically reduced. I
Hmm.
mean, i- if you try to charge your phone wirelessly or something, like you really need some extra contact.
Yeah.
And even compared to like actually having something plugged into your phone,
Yeah.
the the connection really really matters a lot as far as picking up signals. And then also, fortunately, another thing to think about is like you can only get to that point with a lot of training data. So what I mean is like with the monkey controlling using that controller, uh, that allows the computer to sort of learn like what your intentions are, learn how to decipher like left, up, right, down.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's pretty
I
basic
so I,
right now.
s
Yeah.
exactly, it's pretty basic. So my hope, I really really hope, Joel, that uh, my thoughts are much more complicated than left, right, up, down, and so
I
it'll be
hope
a little
so
bit
too.
harder to discern without training than that. So I can't promise that that's going to be a guarantee for a long time,
Yeah.
but
I got
I don't.
interested I
Hmm.
got interested in this kind of early on because I was writing a script that I still someday want to have it come to fruition. But early on, there's this guy, Kevin Warwick, who was a person who was experimenting with implants in his body, and he
Mm,
actually put them in his body. But at the time, and this was some time ago, he was able to communicate emotions between him and his wife through the implants. So, how important, maybe emotional intelligence or maybe emotion can be transmitted as well as thoughts too.
mhm.
And I don't know what the ramifications are of that. Have you heard of anything like that? That's more than just thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, I think any sort of trait or state that you can sort of kind of clearly delineate, say that you can say like, oh, I'm happy right now, or oh, I'm thinking up. Anything that you can clearly delineate, you can probably find a way of teaching a computer to recognize it. and
I
and what I
see.
mean
Yeah.
by that is all you need then is just to choose what information it's going to perceive. So maybe for happy, maybe what it's doing is, and I don't know this
Yeah.
example, so I'm just totally speculating.
Yeah.
Maybe it's going based off of his pulse and his blood pressure,
Right.
and whether or not, and his breathing rate, and sort of the fusion of these three things. Maybe there's a pattern in how all three of these metrics relate to each other that's unique for happy, and maybe it's completely different and unique for sad. And so and so you don't need to actually have some real concrete definition of what happy or sad is. You just need to know what is a proxy, like
But then, just like you
what's
say,
coming. Yeah.
we might find that people in different cultures have a different biological response to happy.
Oh, yeah, it has
You know?
it has to be totally individual. It has to be totally individual for something like that. You're absolutely right. I think that's um, that's something you just simply can't avoid. I mean,
Yeah.
you can look at someone's blood pressure and say whether that person has hypertension or not.
Hmm.
Um, but even and to kind of continue with that analogy, you can't say whether they're going to have a heart attack or not,
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
though the risk is there, even though on the population level, oh, maybe they are at are at heightened risk of heart issues because of this blood pressure. Even though we do know that it's a pretty clear link, when it gets to an individual and making
Yeah.
a conclusion about one specific person, you can't really say that with a lot of confidence.
But do
You're
you think we'll
limited.
be able to
So
say it with more confidence as the uh, technology gets more and more data and more data points coming into the same thing?
yeah,
The
I
central
think
Borg or whatever?
Yeah, and I think that's possible, and so what I'm saying is sort of just
Yeah.
an analogy, and so to come back to what you're saying when it comes
Yeah.
to emotions and all that, I think it's in the realm of possibility
Hmm.
to think that with the right data validated in the right way, yeah, you can tease out an emotional state um, from that. It might be hard to actually access that. I mean, it might require a brain implant or a head cap that everyone's wearing around all the time with a light
We're all
on it that
wearing our head caps. We're
flashes
all gonna have
flashes
helmets with
green for happy. Uh-huh.
flashes screen. He looks like he's available for a conversation now. Oh, stay away from
Exactly.
him. It's all red. All right, we're moving on to the next segment here. I thought maybe you might want to see some koala bears just to remind yourself of breathing and being calm, even though the artificial intelligence segment is coming. Let's just see what the chat room's saying. Chuck Goldsmith says, can they control their urge to gamble and spend money? It's a good question. You know, that's the question too, is like, will these mechanisms be able to control our moods so that maybe we'll have our little Soma holidays through our brain interfaces? Greg says a computer interface would add to the storage capacity of the brain and possibly be used as a wireless control system. Increased brain activity or increased intelligence would require a remapping or restructuring of the brain itself. And Jason says the brain is more malleable than we give it credit for. Interesting. Kamala was saying that thing about chemicals within the body correlating with mood. Sven's friend, Bob Keck, is into the connection between linguism and quantum physics. Wow. I don't even know where to begin with that. I didn't even know how to answer Vernus' question, what do comedians think about voice recognition? I'm a comedian. I have no idea anything about what I think about that. I can't even understand that, Sven. Let's read Sven's one more time before we get into the artificial intelligence. Sven says, well, let's see if I can. Yeah, it's so interesting, Joel. My old friend Bob is right now into the connection between linguism and the quantum physics. I'm gonna have to ask Max about that. But let's get on. This is the final segment. It's about artificial intelligence, where that's going. Are these artificial intelligence beings going to replace us? Are they going to be our best friends? Who knows? Maybe both. What do you think about with artificial intelligence? That has sort of snuck up on us, I think, because really we've been feeding an artificial intelligence in search engines for a long time. Google is essentially an artificial intelligence.
Mhm.
What do you think? What are the advances in that, and how do you think that's going to affect us going forward? Artificial intelligence.
I think that there's just so many different ways in which we could use it that are useful. So I mentioned like discovering new drugs, running certain
Yeah.
simulations to figure out how to how to skip over tedious tasks, how to get to answers more quickly. I mean, when it comes to something like climate change, for instance, it, there's so many different factors in how the planet works and how the temperature of the Earth. So many different factors go into like determining what that is, and artificial intelligence helps to build simulations
Do you think that
for
that's
kind of
going to make
unpacking those
more
links.
scientists? Because I think one of the reasons people don't go into science, or maybe they go into science and then decide they want to do something else, is because you have to spend a lot of times your entire life trying to work out one problem in a
Mm,
very methodical, sort of tedious way. So, do you think
mhm.
if we can build these simulations more in computers, that maybe it will spark more people to have interest in science?
Yeah, I think that that's true to an extent. I think that science evolves and people's interests evolve too. I mean, there's many more people now who are interested in working with computers and sort of working on algorithms and simulations than there were a decade ago or 2 decades ago. Like there's no question that that's true. And I think that the more people hear about certain problems that they would want to solve, I think that probably motivates people the most to going out and actually solving them. And also just knowing and feeling like they're actually capable of doing it is probably the biggest barrier. I mean, so many people who
Yeah.
are in the sciences are people who who grew up and were reinforced to think that, oh yeah, they can do it. And so that's a really huge barrier to actually getting people in science is
Yeah.
convincing people that like,
That they
oh
can
yeah,
do it.
you're absolutely able to do this.
That
Um,
makes sense.
because when you're in college and in high school, you're told that if you don't get A's in all your classes, then maybe you're not cut out for it. But that's just bullshit. It's just really
Yeah.
not.
That's one of those
That's
things I think that gets into people's heads. Like somebody just anywhere along the line could say, you're not good at math. And then all of a
mhm,
sudden you get that programming in your head. I'm not
yeah.
good at math. And then you're never good at
Mhm.
math. But chances are you could be like the next Einstein, but you just aren't going to allow yourself now because you've got that
Yeah,
programming.
it's an enormous disservice, I think, because I think it sort of goes to this really easy framework that people resort to, which is thinking that like talent is more important than work
Yeah.
and and passion, right? I mean, at the end of the day, like talent will only get you so far.
Yeah.
Um, and then if you're interested in something and you're willing to work
I
because you're
think
interested in
interest
it,
is
that'll only take you much further.
yeah, interest is one of
It's
the
the most
most important
important
thing. It's the most important thing. Yeah.
to me. Yeah, yeah,
Interest.
yeah, I think so.
I agree with you. Okay, so speaking of that, I want to find out what your goals are and what your interests are going forward.
Personally, so I've been really enjoying writing. So I was in grad school. I started grad school in 2016. I finished in 2020. Um, Out there, I was just doing lab research, but I also started doing some writing there. I started freelancing, starting working on science journalism. And then as soon as I finished my PhD, I kind of dove in. I've been a freelance journalist ever since, and I really like it. It's really fun. It's really fun to speak to experts, to learn about what they're doing, learn about what the latest science is in all these different areas, and communicate that with the public. I derive a lot
Yeah.
of joy, and it's a fun creative pursuit too. I mean, just working with words is a really cool thing. So for the foreseeable future, that's what I'll be doing. I think it'd be fun to work on some longer projects. So maybe, depending on whether I get an idea down the road, it'd be really fun to sell a book or something
Yeah.
at some point. But for now, just science news articles, some features here and there.
What are the
That's
books
it.
that are books or movies or television shows that are inspiring you as a person with a scientific mind?
Oof, that's a good question. So one book that I really enjoyed, I read last year, and I wrote a review about it for Wired. Actually, it was called what's the actual name? It's Mr. Humble and Doctor Butcher. So it's written by this wonderful she's a scientist, but a writer also. Her specialty is sort of like history of medicine, and what she had been researching for a while and sort of reported on was this one doctor, this is a surgeon in the Cold War era, and what his specialty was transplants, and specifically he was really obsessed with this idea of transplanting the human mind, the consciousness.
Yeah.
Basically, if someone were to become paralyzed, could they just be attached to a new body, and would the consciousness follow? So this is sort of like Cold War era.
It's
He
so
was really
totally
interested in
fascinating to me, this. I mean, I
yeah,
agree. Yeah. Tell me more.
and he had done all these experiments on monkeys, and really just kind of perfecting this surgery of of basically transplanting a head, right? Or transplanting the body, really depends on how you look at it, and who you're talking to.
I got a
Um,
body transplant. Oh, it
yeah,
looks good. How's it
exactly. And so
work?
and the reason why I really so I definitely recommend that book to anyone,
Yeah.
and the reason why I really like it is it does such a good job of showing um what to me is like the most fascinating aspects of science, which is how science fits into society on a moral level, ethical level, obviously how technology advances and what that means, how culture sort of keeps pace with that. Um,
I
and
love
so
that.
those are the sorts of questions that I find really intriguing.
We're gonna have to put that on our book club list. We're
Yeah,
gonna
yeah,
start
for sure.
a book club on lunch therapy, and that's definitely should be on the list. Have they ever implanted a human head? Transplanted?
Um, no, there's one surgeon I believe in Italy who swears that he could do it if given the opportunity. There was I think one person was very close to doing it.
Uh,
Um, but I think they backed out the last second. And I misspoke before. I said that if someone's paralyzed or something, it's not that
yeah,
if they're paralyzed, it's if their body's like diseased or something. Say they're
yeah,
multi-organ failure.
yeah.
Um, and the reason why I'm making that clarification is because you would necessarily be paralyzed in the new body because you wouldn't have the sort of connection between your
Oh,
brain and that
interesting.
body and nerve. So it's not like you're walking around on this new body or anything like that. It's sort of like you're able to live longer because you're not on this other body that's deteriorating. That's the general idea. So it gets into these really ethical questions about like,
What do
okay,
you
yeah, but
think?
you're
What do you think? I mean, what are your thoughts
mm,
of where the being would live? Because we have our cells have intelligence as well. So we've got like, you know, 75% or
mm.
80% of our being is this body. And then so when you transplant the head, who is there?
Yeah, I think that we underestimate, just as people, the way we think about our bodies, we underestimate how much of our self, kind of capital S self, is formed by just how we feel in our body, how our gut feels, whether we're hungry, how we just feel all around. And from that perspective, I think um, I would say that consciousness is a product of much more than just the brain kicking around in your skull.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would think so too. All right, I'm going to have to end the interview, but this has been super fascinating, Max. And I hope that you will come back on the show when we have particular topics. I would love it if you could be the lunch therapy equivalent of Bill Nye the Science Guy. I would really appreciate that. It's great having your expertise, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. This was a lot of fun.
All right. We'll see you soon. This has been Max Levy. You can check him out at his website, which is
maxglevy.com. Yeah.
maxglevy.com. Yeah, check it out because there are all kinds of great articles on there. And also, you know, if you want to contact him, can people contact you if they have questions or
Yeah,
follow-up things that they would like?
you can find me on Twitter. I'm
Okay.
at laxmevy, so just swap the first letter of my first and last name.
Lax Meavy. All right,
Mm,
cool. Thanks a lot, Lax Meavy. And we'll see you soon.
thank you.
All right, that was Lax Meavy. Hang around because we're going to do the dance break with Adam Pierce. But that was super fun. Yes, thanks for going through the gauntlet, Max, and explaining some stuff to me, who I have. Maybe I'm not as smart as Sven's friend, who is apparently Bob is. I don't know. I mean, if I had him on the show, my head would probably explode. Greg Warlove has the prize for the longest chat. An isomorphism exists between linguistic features and the quantum field theory formalism. You can read it yourself, but it seems to be trying to explain what Bob Keck, Sven's friend, is into. But anyway, let's. So thanks to Max Levy. Thanks everybody. Thanks Shelby for introducing me to Max. Thanks everybody for being here today, because I think it's important to talk about this stuff, even if even if I don't even know half the time anything about the nuts and bolts of the science. We want to know as performers, as people living in the world, we want to know what's going on so that we can all make decisions about it, right? And think about these things in a deep way. I have a fish on the back of my head, so it's really hard to be taken seriously at all. So we're going to dance now. We're going to dance. I've got Adam Pierce. This is going to be just kind of shake it off. Dance it out, get ready for the weekend. Adam Pierce, of course, has been on the show. He's fantastic. Every week he puts out an acoustic cover, but he also writes his own songs. He performs all over the country. He's been on American Idol several times. Let's get into it. Dance 'em if you got 'em.
Welcome back, y'all. This is a song that should never be attempted on acoustic guitar. But
don't do it. Do it. Do it.
Go for it.
Song about science. Wasn't it?
These players try to get me 'cause they like my behind. I can't help my business if I can't get a trick.
I gotta get some scientists dancing.
Tricks up for kids. Oh, come on and kick me. Oh, come on and kick me. Oh, come on and kick me. Oh, you got your problems. Oh, I've got my eyes wide. Oh, you got your big cheese. I've got my hash bride. I can't get my boogies, they go out of control. I know that you don't care, but I want you to know. Beneath chocolate flavor is a favorite treat for men who don't bother with the taste of a tea. Oh, come on and kick me.
That's what he does. Max is like a bridge between the scientists and the laymen, or laywomen.
I've got my eyes wide. Oh, you got your big cheese. I've got my hash pipe. I've got my hash pipe.
You can check out Adam Pierce on his YouTube channel. I highly recommend it. He is a true mensch, as they say, and a dynamic performer with risk,
Come on and
playing
kick me.
hash pipe on his acoustic guitar.
Come on and kick me. Oh, come on and kick me. Oh, you got your problems. Oh, I've got my eyes wide. Oh, you got your big cheese. I've got my hash pipe. I've got my hash pipe.
this has to do with science.
I've got my
Dig it
house
out.
painted.
Lit.
A little Weezer for you. That's such a freaking great song. It's a very heavy song. To freaking hear those guys singing it is awesome. It's great. Thank y'all for tuning in.
All right,
Hope
see
you
y'all
enjoyed
next
that.
week.
I sure did. Rock and roll.
Rock and roll.